I'm going to be straight with you. When people ask who would win between the USA and Iran, they're asking the wrong question entirely. But I spent weeks digging through military data, defense budgets, and strategic analysis to answer it anyway. Because the real answer is way more complicated, and frankly more important than you think. What I found wasn't just about missiles and aircraft carriers. It was about what winning even means in modern warfare, and why that definition changes everything. Okay, so before we compare a single weapon system, we need to define what winning actually looks like, because it's not what you see in movies. In analytical terms, winning means achieving specific political objectives within acceptable costs, timeframes, and constraints. For the US, that might mean neutralizing Iran's nuclear program or stopping regional aggression. For Iran, it could mean survival, imposing enough cost to force a ceasefire, or rallying regional allies. And here's what makes this so complex. Real conflict between these two nations would be catastrophic regardless of who wins on paper. We're talking about massive civilian casualties, economic collapse, regional destabilization, and potential escalation beyond anyone's control. So when I show you this data, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just trying to understand what the numbers actually tell us about capability, not about what should happen. Let's start with the most basic comparison. Money and manpower. The United States defense budget for 2024 is roughly $842 billion. Iran's? Somewhere around $10 billion, maybe $15 billion, depending on how you count it. That's not a gap. That's a chasm of about 60 to 80 times larger. The U.S. can outspend Iran on a single aircraft carrier program by more than Iran's entire annual military budget. But purchasing power is different. A dollar goes further in Iran, so that $10 billion buys more locally. Still, we're talking about fundamentally different resource pools. Now, personnel. Iran has roughly 610,000 active duty personnel plus about 350,000 reserves, and they use conscription to maintain those numbers. The U.S. has about 1.3 million active duty and another 800,000 reserves, all volunteer. But here's the thing, raw headcount doesn't equal deployable combat power. The U.S. can project maybe 2,000 and 30% of its force abroad while maintaining global commitments. Iran's forces are largely defensive and tied to homeland protection. So when you see these numbers, remember they don't tell you who can actually show up to the fight and where. This is where geography completely reshapes the conversation. Iran sits on the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 21% of global petroleum passes. It has mountainous terrain, strategic depth, and home field advantage. The U.S. is 7,000 miles away. Yes, America has bases in Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Diego Garcia, but those are also within range of Iranian missiles. Distance matters enormously. The U.S. military is built to project power anywhere on Earth, but that projection requires tankers, logistics, and access, all of which can be contested. Iran knows it can't win a conventional force-on-force fight, so its entire strategy is asymmetric. Mines in the strait, proxy forces across the region, ballistic missiles targeting U.S. bases. The U.S. strategy relies on overwhelming air superiority and standoff strike capability. But getting that capability into theater, sustaining it, and protecting those bases is a massive operational challenge. Iran doesn't need to win. It just needs to impose enough cost and chaos to make the conflict politically unsustainable. That's a completely different calculation than most people assume. Technology gap is staggering. The U.S. operates around 2,000 fighter aircraft, including fifth-generation F-22s and F-35s, that Iran literally cannot see on radar until it's too late. Iran has maybe 300-350 combat aircraft, mostly older F-4S, 4S, F-5S, and some Russian models. The U.S. has a fleet of tankers and AWACS for sustained operations. Iran has almost none. Pilot training hours in the U.S. are among the highest in the world. Iranian pilots get a fraction of that flight time. In the air, it's not even close. At sea, the U.S. Navy has 11 aircraft carriers, advanced Aegis destroyers, and nuclear submarines. Iran has 0 blue water navy, but it has hundreds of fast attack craft, mini submarines, and sea mines designed for the shallow, confined waters of the Persian Gulf. On the ground, the U.S. has about 6,000 main battle tanks and advanced combined arms doctrine. Iran has perhaps 1,600 tanks, many outdated. But Iran has something else, one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East. Thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges up to 2,000 kilometers, plus sophisticated air defense systems like the Bavar 373. They can't shoot down every U.S. aircraft, but they can make every strike costly. And in cyber and electronic warfare, both sides have significant capabilities. The U.S. more sophisticated, Iran more willing to take risks. Here's what all those numbers don't capture: logistics, sustainability, and politics. The U.S. can move enormous amounts of material across oceans, has prepositioned equipment, and an industrial base that can sustain long conflicts. Iran would struggle to resupply and maintain equipment under sustained attack, but it also doesn't need to fight long, just long enough. And then there are alliances. The U.S. has treaty obligations and regional partners, but also needs their permission for overflight and basing. Iran has relationships with militias and proxies across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Any conflict immediately becomes regional, pulling in actors that change every calculation. The biggest factor is the one that makes this whole comparison somewhat academic: escalation risk. Iran isn't a nuclear power, but it's close enough that any existential threat could accelerate that timeline. A conflict would spike oil prices, crash global markets, and potentially draw in other powers. Deterrence, the idea that both sides lose too much to fight, is what actually keeps the peace. So when we ask who would win, the data shows the U.S. has overwhelming conventional superiority. But the real answer is that everyone loses. The point of comparing capabilities isn't to advocate for conflict. It's to understand why deterrence works and why these weapons, bases, and budgets exist in the first place. They're meant to prevent war, not win it. Look, I know this isn't the clear-cut answer some people wanted. The truth is that modern warfare between major powers is so destructive that winning becomes almost meaningless.